Welcome to our Christmas Eve message. Now, we in the West, in the church, we focus on Christmas so much. It's such a big celebration and a big holiday, not only for the church, but for the entire culture. It can be easy to think then that the Christmas story is the bulk of the Bible. But really, it's not. Even when we just look at the four Gospels, those stories, the accounts of Jesus' life, then we see that the Christmas story only takes up a very small portion of them. And even there are two of them that one doesn't mention it at all, and the other talks cryptically about it. John talks about the Word becoming flesh, but neither one of them, neither John nor Mark, spend much time at all dwelling on the birth of Jesus Christ. We see that in the book of Luke and in the book of Matthew. How many of you screen your calls? Think you just caller ID and figure out who's calling? Most of us, right? Because you are going to get bombarded with spam calls if you don't take a look at who is calling before you actually answer the phone. Now, maybe you make a call or you get a call and you see it's your boss and you're like, I'm going to let that go to voicemail. No, I'm not judging. But the name that comes up makes a difference. And who we think is calling changes how we respond. The blood bank around here, Vitalant, I support them, and they call a lot though, and often their calls get marked as spam. They come up as spam. They're marked that way by my cell phone provider. Probably not going to get a lot of people to pick up the phone that way. Who we think it is makes a big difference in how we respond. There are lots of different ways that we can think about Jesus. And who we think he is will direct how we respond to him. Some people see him as baby Jesus. The Talladega Nights, the Ricky Bobby, the race car driver, he prays to open their meal, to ask God's blessings on the food with his family and friends. And he prays to sweet little baby Jesus. And he prays to him there in the manger. And, if you only see Jesus as a helpless baby in a manger, then that's going to affect how you respond to him. Jesus knew that people responded to him in a lot of different ways when he was here on the earth in his time of ministry before his death. He had gone through several years of ministry. He had healed people. He had walked on water. He had multiplied food to provide for thousands of people. He had taught in ways that people had never heard before. And then in Mark chapter 8, he asks his disciples who the people are saying that he is. They respond that some people think that he's John the Baptist, or that he's Elijah come back to life, or one of the other prophets. Now, all of those things would mean that this was nearing the end days. But then Jesus asks his closest followers, he says in verse 28 or 29, who do you say I am? He wanted them to respond for themselves, to define this one that they had come to know better than almost anyone else. That question, who do we think Jesus is, still resonates today. And not only in the church, but in the culture at large. People are fascinated by the person of Jesus. Love him or hate him, they want to read more and watch more specials about him and learn more about him. More books have been written about him in the last 30 years than in all of the rest of history. And even in the culture at large, movies like The Passion of the Christ 20 years ago become massive successes at the box office. Scholars continue to debate the Gospels and even asking, did Jesus really say this or that? Did he do this? Even people who don't believe in Jesus still use his name as a cuss word. He has influence today. So what we do with this question, who do you say that Jesus is, will shape our lives. I believe it will shape us more than the answer to almost any other question we face. So let's explore this a little bit. If you want to learn about Jesus, the place to do it is by reading the four Gospels. These are the accounts of Jesus' life. Jesus didn't leave any of his own writings behind, and so we rely on the records of those who knew him or those who interviewed those who knew him. And so the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written in the first 30 years or so after Jesus' death by people who had known him or were interviewing those who knew him. Trevor Hudson puts it this way: if you are trying to know more about Jesus, keep company with Jesus in the Gospels. When we read these stories, we get to experience what Jesus was like. And we can get a window into walking with him, keeping company with him as we read the Gospels. So here's a simple exercise. It'd be hard to actually do it, but it's simple in itself. Read one of the Gospels through in one sitting. Any of the four, it doesn't matter. Some of them are shorter than others, so depending on the length of the gospel and how quickly you read, might be somewhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. But to read through a gospel in one sitting gives you a different perspective than looking at a few verses here or there in a sermon or a message. It gives you a different perspective than reading it a chapter at a time in your devotional time, or even 3 or 4 chapters in one sitting. When we look at the whole gospel together, we're able to notice how Jesus interacts, how he interacts with God the Father, the intimacy and the closeness, as he calls him Father. He calls him Abba. And we see the way that Jesus interacts with other people as well. Notice in particular the ways that he interacts with those who are on the margins of society: prostitutes, tax collectors, the poor. These were people who had no authority in their culture, and yet he interacts with them with love and with grace. As you read, see the ways that Jesus sees the world. See what he does, and not only what he goes about doing, but the way that he does it. And as you're reading it, notice how you respond to him as you keep company with Jesus in the Gospels. As Hudson puts it, Jesus is the most alive, aware, and responsive human being who has ever lived. We see this seeping through in the stories of his life. When you read it, you also get a sense of those who knew him best. Those 12 closest followers who spent most of their days with him. And when you see them, you realize that they are scared. They're uncertain. They're confused about what Jesus is doing and what it means and what this means for the world. It makes you realize that between them and these men who were willing to go to different parts of the world to share the gospel, that something must have happened in the middle of there to change them from these scared, confused people into people who were not only willing to go and take the message around the world, but were willing even to die for proclaiming that message. All but one of the disciples gave their lives for that message. They were killed in violent ways because they were proclaiming that Jesus was risen from the dead. They believed it. And we see this, the most reasonable explanation is the one that the Bible gives, that this man, Jesus, who was fully human and also fully divine, that he was not only killed, but was raised from the dead. And that he is the one, the Savior of humankind. Now, saying that he's the one sounds pretty exclusive. I mean, aren't there lots of other spiritual teachers, people that it can be good for us to learn from in spirituality? Dallas Willard is a brilliant Christian philosopher and theologian. He had an interaction with one of his doctoral students who asked him, he said, "You're an intelligent man, you're thoughtful, you're well-educated. Why do you believe in Jesus?" And Willard responded, "Who else would you suggest?" He wasn't only being snarky there. He was actually looking for a comparison. He said, if you believe in someone else, then let's make a comparison and see which is the best decision. And he said, if what you believe is better, I am prepared to change my thinking. When you compare Jesus to all the others, and I've looked at a lot of others, Jesus is better. Jesus is the one. Now, when we read the Gospels, we get to see what Jesus' ministry was like, and that is an essential component of faith, but it's only half of knowing him. The historical knowledge, the words, the actions, his death and his resurrection, those are important for us to know, but we can know about all of those and still not know who Jesus is. We need to develop a personal understanding of Jesus from experience. We have to have the historical and the personal. My wife and I have been married for more than 20 years now. And you might know her. You can recognize her, see pictures of her, and know what she looks like and her hairstyle and where she's worked or where she went to school, things like that. You can learn all of that. But you're not going to know her like I do because I've spent time with her. I've experienced the joy and the strength of her character and the compassion and the energy. And I know who she is, and I've seen that over the years of walking with her in life. It's been revealed, it's been a gift that's been given to me over time. And it's the same way with knowing Jesus. We need to know the facts and the history, but we also need the personal experience. The first comes from the gospel stories. The second comes from walking with him as we give ourselves to him and begin to follow him. That process does not happen overnight. It takes a lifetime. Christianity can never be just about knowing the history, the facts, the Sunday school lessons. It has to involve us radically giving ourselves to him. That's how we get to know him. Who do you say that Jesus is? Is he a good man? Is he a wise teacher? Is he one of the ways to get to know God? Or is he what we see proclaimed in the scriptures, where Peter responds that you are the Messiah, the Son of God? Jesus himself said that he is the way, the truth, and the life. Or then Thomas, when he saw Jesus after the resurrection, he said, my Lord and my God. It was personal for him. Jesus today still calls us to be disciples. He invites us to say that we've read about him, we've seen his deeds, we've seen his character revealed in the Gospels, but to say that we want to bring our lives into that story, that we want to give ourselves unconditionally to him. He invites us to know him, but he also knows how hard it is. And so you might struggle with giving yourself to him. I encourage you then, give what you are able to. You don't have to do more than what you can do, but just take a step towards him. I mean, it's difficult enough for us to completely give ourselves to another human being whom we can see, let alone Jesus, who we can't see. Hudson puts it this way: genuine surrender seldom happens quickly or without a battle. Usually it happens gradually, one day at a time, as we learn to trust the love of Christ that we have seen in the Gospels. Are you willing to enter into that journey? When you take those steps, maybe it's your first steps, maybe it's a deeper step in this walk, but it's just the beginning. For the rest of our lives, we get to experience Jesus, to get to know him better as a companion and as a friend. Might sound cheesy to say that, but it's true. He will walk with us through life. And we can ask him questions. We can share with him. And he talks with us. He talks with us through his Spirit and through other people. And he gives us the power to live life well. You're never alone if you have put your trust in Jesus. You can keep company with Jesus in the Gospels and in your own life. He is there for us. Pray with me. Jesus, thank you for being there with us. Help us to surrender who we are to you. Lord, that in this moment we would just take the next step towards you, the next step of giving ourselves to you. Thank you that you give us that chance. Please fill us with your Spirit and help us to know you better. Amen.